Alright, so for this next video, we're gonna quickly look over how to build an endpoint. Now, there's multiple, not transformations, but different combinations of this type of stuff. So it's hard to get a video that kind of hits it all at once. But I'm gonna go through the stuff that you'll see the most often, and then the more particular stuff will just kind of have to happen. So for me, I was given a task where I needed to add an endpoint that gives us the ability to get drop-down data. For us, it was the ability to get workshops. So to do this, I first had to figure out which repo am I working in, because there's multiple repos that offer endpoints. So because it was a drop-down, I knew it was going to go inside of the repo known as entities, which is essentially where all the drop-downs go. Now, at this point, first, I then identify what type of endpoint is it. So I knew it was a entity endpoint, which means the URL contains the word entity. If it contains that, then all it means is that you need to be logged in order to view the data. So I first created my endpoint, which is just this here. So you can see I have information inside of my Java class that tells it what type of endpoint it is. So here you go. This is the URL to it. It takes in a GET request, and this is its name. I then proceed to creating what is known as a workflow. So a workflow is just a sequence of steps or a sequence of work items that get run in parallel, or in order, sorry, not in parallel. So here we go. So my workflow, all it does is it checks to make sure that certain query string parameters are there, team code and program code. If not, then it returns an error. I then proceed to creating my workflow. So as you see here, I call this function called prepare dropdown workflow, which just sets up all the parameters that I need. And then after that, I invoke the get request, which performs the following steps. Parses the request, makes sure that I'm logged in, it gets the language that I want to get the request, or it retrieves the language in which the data should be returned in. It runs my SQL command against the database, and then eventually transforms it and sends it back to me. If I go take a look at my actual work item that I wrote, see that. Right in here. So I go take a look at the work item, and all you see here, it goes and gets the work. Well, this is actually the work item itself, but here, all it does is it has a function called call, which all work items must have, and it performs a series of steps. The first set of steps is it goes and gets the necessary variables. Then after that, it performs a database call using our DAO, which is explained in the other video describing all of our repositories. This is talking to the data source repository. Then performs a SQL query up here. This string here represents our SQL query. The question marks in the SQL query essentially just represent variables that will be replaced. So the params, which is this object right here, each one of those, so the domain code, will replace the question mark here, and so on and so forth. So you need as many question marks as you have variables. It then gets executed, and the data is stored within an object right here, and then that gets transformed later on. One quick way to see if your endpoint is working is using Postman. So Postman, you can type in the URL, which we saw before, right? Bin API outreach v2 entities ideas workshops, which is the endpoint that we saw above right here. We're going to make it of type get, which was what the servlet was going to take in. And then, as you can see here, our query string parameters, which were defined inside of the workflow. You can see that right here. We want team code and program code. when I hit send, see that I get the data that my server returned to me. Now I have the ability to get data from the server. Now, how can I test that though? Like using this type of stuff means that I would have to run every single endpoint manually through Postman. Well, one of the things that we do here is we actually create server-side tests, which means that we actually execute tests on the server just using some basic HTTP request objects. So if you go inside of this project called entities.tests, and every single repo has a .tests project, you see here this class is calling all the possible endpoints that this whole repository offers. And so when you compile this project, just right click, run as Maven install, it'll actually compile the project for you. And once completed, you can go to this URL, localhost port 8080, system console bundles, click install, go to where that project is, so mine's right here. I double click the jar file. I'll click install. I'll click reload. We can see that it's marked as started. In order to make sure that this works, we're just going to go take a look at what the URL is for this, to run all these tests. In order to do that, we're just going to open up the servlets package and just see that the URL is this. I'm going to copy that, and we're just going to go to our web page, go localhost port 8080, and paste this in, and hit enter. And by seeing all the tests be green, we know that everything's working. Cool, so that's running an endpoint. Servlet, workflow, work item. Write some unit tests, write some server-side tests, and once everything's done, that's it, just run the build. If everything's green, you should see this. If any lines are red, it means those tests have failed. All right, thanks for listening. Bye-bye.